talk about why people should actually care about like what their stool looks like after they go to the bathroom, no matter what their age is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have stigmatized the entire concept of poop and having a bowel movement. Like we've stigmatized this where it's like, oh, well, that's dirty. That's bathroom stuff. And we're not allowed to share or talk about that. And unfortunately, we suffer as a result of the stigma that we create there because, you know, if I were a cardiologist and my job were to keep your heart as healthy as possible, the first thing that I would do is take a listen to your heart with a stethoscope. That would provide me with a significant amount of information about what's going on. You could hear a lot. But I'm not a cardiologist, I'm a gut guy. And so instead, the first thing that I would do is want to know what's going on with your bowel movements. Because when people have large, sausage-shaped, soft but formed bowel movements, and I want to add that the experience of having that bowel movement is, because this is important. You can blush, but you're proving my point, right? Which is that
I just had to laugh when you're like large warm sausage shaped bowel movement and that feeling you get when you're having.
Okay, so it is warm, but the feeling that you have is important too, because if you're squeezing, grunting, and like putting tremendous effort in so that you can pass a nugget, you're not really pooping, right? Whereas on the flip side, you feel the urge, you walk to the restroom, pop a squat, and you have a good, vigorous, effortless bowel movement that is extremely satisfying. That's the way that it's supposed to be, right? That's the way that it's supposed to be. When things are healthy, that's the way that you experience it. And when things are not the way that they're supposed to be, when the body is out of balance on some level, then it requires effort and it's hard and lumpy bumpy, or it's loose and watery and you're uncomfortable when you're doing this. And right. And this is speaking to there's something wrong.
Yeah. So would you say that the opposite is also true? Like somebody who is constantly either constipated or like having like liquid poop, diarrhea, or like the little pebbles, you know, you're talking about somebody who puts in a lot of effort and there's not much there. Are those signs that your gut is unhealthy, or could it just be a sign that maybe something they ate that day didn't agree with them?
Well, we're all going to have bad days, right? If I love spicy food. If I overdo it on the jalapenos, I'm not going to feel well. So we're all going to have bad days. We're all going to have moments where we get bloated or have diarrhea or constipation. The question is this a consistent enough issue that it's bothering you? Right? Because if you didn't have a problem, you would never think about it. But when you do have a problem, then you start to think about it because you acknowledge that this is actually negatively affecting your quality of life. And that means it's enough of a consistent issue that we need to deal with this.
So when somebody has like continuous unhealthy bowel movements, what are some steps somebody can take on their own to address this naturally, I guess you could say, before having to go to the doctor?
So I think I would say that we can return to fundamentals, to the basics. And naturally, there's a dietary approach. But before we get there, let's tap into the fundamentals, which are that we want to establish a rhythm with our body. And that bowel movements actually should be, on some level, in rhythm. Meaning that when your body is working the way that it's supposed to, you're going to have good, regular bowel movements at specific times. Doug, there's a reason why we poop in the morning. When we get up, our body is actually driving forward with cortisol. Cortisol is our get up and go hormone, all right? And it's part of our sympathetic nervous system, but it's actually quite normal for us to start to have this in the morning. And the other thing that happens is we start to release serotonin. And serotonin, you mentioned earlier that 90 to 95% of serotonin is produced in the gut. Why is it there? It's not because it does the exact same thing that it does in the brain. It's not because it's in your gut to affect your mood, although it can. The reason why it's there is because it helps to establish rhythm. With this in mind, I want to help people establish rhythm. And one of the things that you can do is to teach your body when the day starts. Now, it's a bit absurd that we have to do this, because if we lived the way we lived for 99.999% of human history, like if we were camping, you know exactly when the day starts because the sun comes up and there's nothing you can do about it. The sun is going to wake you up. But we live in a house and we can have blackout shades and you would not even know whether it's daylight or not, right? So it's important to get outside. And the reason why this becomes critical is not just to teach your body that it's the morning, but that morning light exposure gives you a surge of serotonin. And that surge of serotonin helps to feed into that good gut rhythm and motility that will fuel a morning bowel movement. All right. So let's start our day with getting outside, getting some natural sunlight. Second, let's get into the rhythm of having our bathroom time. So yes, we should, like, for example, gut coffee. I'm happy to talk about this if you want me to. Coffee is a gut microbiome drink. Coffee can help to stimulate a good, vigorous bowel movement.
Touching on fiber, I know you're like the fiber goat, right? And I believe, Simon's got his longevity challenge. I know part of his challenge is the 30 plants per week. In that, I think you were probably the guy who helped with that, if I'm correct. And people, I think at times, are scared of fiber because they'll eat a bunch of fiber and their gut's jacked up. They feel bloated. They feel constipated. I think Simon's referenced a study, maybe we've talked about this as well, I can't remember, in our previous chats, that if somebody has an unhealthy gut, when they eat fiber, it could potentially jack up their GI system even more. I'd love to hear your insights on that and how people can healthily and individually introduce more fiber into their diet.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I want to unpack this because it's a nuanced topic. I sometimes feel that I get misunderstood because people hear that I like fiber and they think that that means all gas, no break. That like every single person, I would tell them increase your fiber intake, but that's not the case. That there's an approach to how we go about doing this. All right. So first, let me define the problem that can occur for some people because I want to make sure they understand and hear this. If you have underlying constipation and you increase your fiber intake, if that makes you poop, you win. All right. Because you will feel better. But that only works for people with mild constipation. For people that come to someone such as myself, a gastroenterologist, you most likely have moderate or severe constipation. And you hear that fiber is good for constipation, so you start adding more and more and more. And the problem is your bowels, it's not enough to get your bowels moving. So then what happens is the fiber gets stuck and it sits there, and your gut microbes, they have unlimited time and opportunity to turn that fiber into gas. So they will start cranking up the gas and you will get bloated and you will be uncomfortable and you will probably be cursing my name, even though I wouldn't have recommended this, right? Because for the reasons that, I'm explaining, like this is a nuanced topic and this will actually make your constipation worse, right? So fiber is not this universal thing for constipation. The key is I want your bowels moving before you start to reintroduce the fiber or to increase your fiber intake. I want the bowels moving already. I don't want you starting being stuck. I want them going. Because when the bowels are moving and you start to add fiber, it is your friend. And it will help to facilitate better bowel movements. And it will help to facilitate keeping them moving. But if you start already stuck, you may find that your fiber gets stuck, and this is a problem. So we have to address this constipation issue first. So most of the time what I would do, Doug, is I would get after, like if a patient were in the clinic with me, I get after the constipation with something such as magnesium. Magnesium oxide, magnesium citrate, magnesium sulfate. That first, before the fiber, to get things going. Step 2 is to start to add the fiber. And when we add the fiber, we start really low and we go slow. So I would make an exercise analogy, which is that your gut, from my perspective, your gut is a muscle. It can be trained. It can be made stronger. The way that we approach exercise is to go to the gym and to know what is the amount of weight that we're actually capable of lifting without hurting ourselves. You start there. right? The same would be true with fiber. Don't start with an amount of fiber that's ridiculously high. Start with the amount that you can actually tolerate. And then what you'll find is that your gut grows stronger. And when it grows stronger, then you're able to add a little bit more. Much like exercise, you have gains at the gym.
What about things like Pepto-Bismol and Tums? Are they effective for helping constipation or unhealthy bowel movements?
So Pepto-Bismol, the active ingredient is bismuth subsalicylate. And this is good for people that have like diarrhea and dyspepsia. It will most likely make your constipation worse. Tums is calcium. Calcium is very constipating. So doing Tums actually make this problem worse as well. So if you have like an upset stomach and you start to do those things, you can actually be feeding into the problem and making it worse. Now, flip side, milk of magnesia. All right. Milk of magnesia. Like I didn't realize this until probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, which is shocking because I was already a board certified doctor at that point. Milk of magnesia is just magnesium. It's just magnesium. So, and it helps to get things moving. So when it comes to these minerals, what you need to know is that magnesium helps to get your bowels moving. Calcium and aluminum pump the brakes. So if you have diarrhea, then like Tums could actually help you to slow it down. But if you have constipation, then you don't want that.
One of the things you hear a lot, especially like on the internet, is that when you fast and you go without food, you essentially, your gut has this cleaning system, right? And it just cleans itself out and regenerates like every day or whatever. And the longer you go without food, sometimes it gives those pathways longer time to clear things out so that your digestive system can recalibrate. Is there truth to that, or is that just things people like to say to get attention?
Yeah, I think that's a distilled down way to try to describe complex things that are happening. What I will say is this, that like sometimes I hear people, so I just want to make sure that I make this separation and distinction. Sometimes I hear people like describe the concept of like poop being stuck.
Poop being stuck? I've never heard that one.
Oh, okay. So as you were describing this of like cleansing, sort of like cleansing, there are definitely people who will argue that like we need a cleanse, meaning like a bowel flush, right? Or to do a colonic, because there's poop that is like caked and stuck to the wall of the colon, and that's actually creating health issues because that's, toxic. Well, constipation by itself is problematic for the microbiome. Any person that has chronic constipation, it will affect their microbiome. There is no doubt about that. But that's not poop being caked and stuck. That's a motility issue or something else. So, I just kind of point that out as make sure that that's totally clear. It sounds like that wasn't what you were getting at. So let me address what you were getting at, which is the idea of like this being some sort of cleansing or purification approach. And I personally wouldn't describe it that way. But that being said, if you get into a calorie deficit, there is no doubt that there are these sorts of elements that exist that are beneficial. The other thing that should be added to this is that our entire body operates with a 24-hour biorhythm, right? This is our circadian rhythm. It affects our sleep. It affects our energy levels and ability to perform functions during the day. Every single organ in our body is actually like adjusting and adapting based upon where it thinks you are in your 24-hour cycle. And so taking control of that with the timing of the food that we eat can actually make a difference. And there are reasons why that include, by the way, the microbiome. There are reasons why the timing of a meal makes a big difference. So like if we eat food early in the day, actually our insulin sensitivity is at its peak early in the day. This is the reason why if you were to have 2 meals a day, you would be better off eating breakfast and lunch rather than lunch and dinner. And if you were to eat the exact same meal later in the day, then it does create issues in the sense that your blood sugar doesn't achieve the same level of control. And the reason why blood sugar is an issue from my perspective as a gut health and gastroenterology expert is because when our blood sugar is out of control and going too high, like unnaturally too high, then it actually has negative consequences on the gut barrier. And the gut barrier starts to break down. And this is the reason why we want to achieve good blood sugar control. Now, this doesn't always mean that lower is better. It just means that we don't want those spikes that are excessively high. I guess the thing about it, Doug, is that I feel like these conversations, like sometimes people plant a flag, take a position that it does well on social media because you're very black and white about it. And when you do that, it creates controversy, which leads to more comments, but also the camp that like agrees with what you're saying, they get behind you, they double click like, and it's a charade. And the truth is a conversation, not like a Twitter card. And so like when it comes to, for example, fasting, it feels like there's people who say fasting has no purpose. It does nothing. And then there's the people who say, oh, well, fasting is the key. And I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle, where fasting clearly can help a person who does not have energy balance, which is at least 80% of America, right? Where they're overweight and metabolically unhealthy as a result of that, consuming excess energy. Fasting is a structured approach that a person can apply that will help them without counting calories to potentially get into a calorie deficit. So the gut microbiome actually thrives on energy balance. This is a general rule that can always be applied. In a person who is overweight or obese, if they achieve a calorie deficit to basically achieve better energy balance, it's clearly good for the gut, regardless of how they do it. What that could be calorie counting, that could be following a specific diet plan. It could also be medication, like a GLP-1 agonist, Ozempic, or it could be something on the spectrum of procedural that includes big surgeries like Roux-en-Y, gastric bypass surgery, or like I have friends who are experts in endoscopic techniques for forms of bariatric surgery. But like the point is the same across the board, which is that if you take a person who's overweight and you put them in a calorie deficit, the energy balance that they achieve will be good for the gut microbiome and the gut barrier and will have an anti-inflammatory effect. So that's, to me, where fasting comes in, is like if you can frame it that way, as opposed to just being like fasting is good or fasting is bad. For people who are overweight or obese, to achieve energy balance, fasting can be a tool that they apply. It's not the magical thing, though. It's just quite simply that you get yourself into a calorie deficit.
Right. And so is like one of the main contributing factors to a poor gut microbiome, is it excess body fat and obesity, based on what you just said?
No doubt. That's been firmly established. I mean, we have studies going back literally almost 20 years now. Like the early microbiome studies from 2006 were in this space looking at the loss of diversity that exists when a person is metabolically unhealthy and obese. I mean, to me, that's, like obesity is the way that we describe the extra body weight. But to me, it's just like a question of energy balance. And clearly the energy is out of balance. And then there's metabolic consequences that come with this. And all of that ultimately feeds back into the gut microbiome and creates problems.
Well, speaking of poor blood sugar, what does sugar do to the gut microbiome, and why should people be careful?
Sugar clearly has negative consequences on the gut microbiome. The exact reason for this is not completely firmly established, but I'll take you into my understanding of it based upon what I've seen in the science. So, you can't argue that sugar, and by the way, when I say sugar, I just want to be clear that I mean refined sugar, like the powder form that we get that would be found in an ultra processed food. You can't argue that that sugar is making its way down to the microbiome to have a direct effect. It's clearly not. It gets absorbed almost immediately. This is the reason why you consume something that contains a lot of added sugar and your blood sugar spikes within an hour. So there's a different mechanism to it. And I believe that the mechanism is aligned with what I was just describing a moment ago, which is that when we spike our blood sugar, which we are prone to do when we consume carbohydrate without any other substances, which is what sugar is, pure refined carbohydrate. There's no breaks, only gas. You spike your blood sugar, and that actually has effects throughout the entire body. The excessive blood sugar that's in your bloodstream now, including in the gut microbiome, and it leads to the breakdown of the gut barrier. The gut barrier is a single layer of cells that lines the intestines, and it separates the inside of your intestines where the microbes live from your bloodstream. So when you break down the gut barrier, you are now allowing things to start to get across, which creates inflammation. And you actually create a snowball effect, not only of inflammation, but also that feeds back to the gut microbes and has negative consequences on the gut microbes. Sugar clearly drives and fuels dysbiosis, which is the word that I would use to describe a damaged gut. So, and this is, basically what I'm now calling out is this full vicious circle, which is a cascade that includes damaging the gut microbes, damaging the gut barrier, activating the immune system, which leads inflammation. And then we see the consequences that come from all of this, which is that now these systems are not working the way that they're supposed to. And it affects us, throughout our entire body, the way that we feel instantly, and also can really start to stack up, carrying that burden of inflammation over the course of time. And by the way, I should add a few sort of caveats here. That number one, when I describe sugar in this way, I'm referring actually to all refined carbohydrates. So I would include flour, because when it's a pure flour, we're talking about a pure carbohydrate, all gas, no break. There's no fiber to slow down the absorption. There's nothing there. And then the other caveat is that I have zero fears about fruit, Doug. Zero. And that's because fruit is not isolated pure sugar. Pure sugar only comes from ultra-processed foods where you are adding it. Right. So I have no concerns that like blueberries or eating an apple or these types of things are problematic, because there's a balance that naturally exists where it's not just carbohydrate. There's also protein. There's also fiber. There's also fat that helps to achieve that balance. So this is, I just want to make sure that people are not fearful of fruit in the process of this conversation.
Explain why fructose isn't bad for your digestive system, because you hear a lot of people at times talk about the dangers of fructose and how it impacts your gut, how it impacts blood sugar, how it leads to body fat. And I know that you disagree strongly with that.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the context that we're referring to. So like the question would be, what did you just eat? Right. And if it's an ultra processed food with high fructose corn syrup, this is problematic for the same reasons that I just described a moment ago with refined sugar. Like this, we're talking about the same thing. And if we're talking about fructose that naturally exists in fruit, bearing in mind that once again, that fruit has other nutrients that include fiber and protein and fat, and the fruit has something that we would call the food matrix. So for example, taking an apple and grinding it into a powder will have a different effect on your body than if you were to grab an apple and take a bite. I don't have concerns about fructose that naturally exists with these whole plant foods. I don't have concerns about that. My concern is when we do unnatural chemical extractions that neither you nor I are capable of doing, right? To isolate and purify fructose so that we can then use that as a building block to create ultra processed foods. That's no different than, there's more than 50 different words that could be used to describe added sugar. And fructose is one of them, and high fructose corn syrup would be another one, and glucose. And you could go down the line. There's so many different things that we could call that. And to me, the physiology is the same.
This leads into my next question, which this has gotten a lot of attention over the last few years, and that is the impact of artificial sweeteners on the gut microbiome. I think it was maybe the end of last week, like Red Food Dye 3 or something. They just announced that the FDA was going to ban that sometime soon, and that took over the health and fitness browse page on the internet. And I think people are oftentimes confused. And, some experts say, you're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies, and that a lot of people haven't mastered a healthy diet. They're not exercising regularly. They're not managing their sleep and stress, but they're nitpicking at all these ingredients that they might see, they should be afraid of on the internet. And they feel like that's the first step they should take. What is your position on artificial sweeteners, preservatives, etc., and how they impact the gut microbiome and our overall health?
So I feel like my position is very firmly established. I have talked about this in both of my books today. But I'll define it right now, which is to say that I have sincere concerns that ultra processed foods are fueling our disease epidemic. The average American, 60% of their calories comes from ultra-processed food. Our kids, it's 70%. I have 4 kids. That's a scary thing. This is what we're raising kids on. I grew up in the 80s. And look, when we were kids in the 80s, I mean, God bless our parents. It was just kind of the culture that, hey, here's this new wave of foods. Like, why would you not eat SpaghettiOs? Right? And Chef Boyardee and drink Kool-Aid. Why would you not? And now we have an increasing awareness of these things. There are 10,000 additives that exist within our food supply. And when you subtract red number 5, we're down to 9,999. And Doug, you should know that out of these 10,000, that they have, if you add red number 5 to the list, my belief, as far as I recall and understand, is that there is less than 40 substances that they have taken off the market due to safety concerns. It's exceedingly rare for them to introduce something into our food supply such that we are the guinea pigs, because we don't know whether it's safe or not safe truly at the time that it's introduced. We're making a lot of assumptions because we allow it in through a loophole called generally recognized as safe, GRAS. So we let it into the food supply, and then people eat a mix of different types of foods that, again, dominate our diet. But how do you define it? How do you define how much a person eats Cheez-Its versus how much a person eats Lucky Charms, right? And it's like, over the course of a lifetime, these evolving targets built with a mix of many different ingredients, it's impossible to isolate exactly where the problems exist. It's really hard to do that when it's such a diverse mix. So, and now here we are, and we're sick, and we're asking questions. How can we make this better? And yet, here comes our government agency to take away this one food coloring that, by the way, wasn't allowed in cosmetics for 35 years due to carcinogenic concerns, but you could ingest it and put it into your intestines, which is much more vulnerable than putting it on your skin. And we were okay with that for 35 years, and they're going to take that away now, right, in the 11th hour, and leave all of these other things still in our food supply, still affecting us, still affecting our children. It's not right. It's not right. Now, to keep balance, because I don't want to make it sound like every single one of the 10,000 food additives is problematic, I want to be clear when I say that. I don't believe that's true. I don't think all 10,000 are bad. I just don't know which ones are bad. That's the problem. And I don't think that the current approach that we have is going to allow us to, with clarity, define that as early as possible. People have to get really sick before you realize there's a problem. That's the issue. So let me put it this way. This is the way I honestly feel. If you're waiting for your government to fix your problems are not going anywhere. That is the honest truth. The government is not going to fix it for you. There are way too many financial influences there. You have to become educated and empowered as an individual, and you have to make choices within your own life to protect yourself. So, and to me, it starts with a quite simple concept. I mean, there's many different variations on this, but if we quite simply got back to eating real food, that's it. It would be a massive step for health. Now, I would love to help people to also rebalance and actually address their fiber deficiency, because I actually think there's a huge thing to that. But if we just by itself got back to eating real food, we'd be a much, much healthier society than we currently are.
So you think people should be concerned with artificial sweeteners as they impact their gut microbiome?
Yes. Sorry for the tangential. So the answer to the artificial sweetener question is that artificial sweeteners may have 0 calories, but they absolutely come into contact with your gut microbiome because they're not getting absorbed. So, and because they come into contact with your gut microbiome, you should expect that this leads to changes within the gut microbiome. The concern that we currently have is that at least some of the artificial sweeteners are clearly affecting your metabolism and insulin sensitivity. And as a result of this, they've done studies where they'll take a person who's being fed artificial sweeteners and they'll transfer their gut microbiome into an animal, and they'll show that that animal now has diabetes. So we're not making ourselves healthier with these foods. Are there completely acceptable alternatives that a person could plug in? Yes. Simple approach, drink water. It's a lot less expensive. Also, you could take that water and you could put a squeeze of fruit, such as citrus, like lemon or grapefruit or whatever it may be. That tastes pretty good. Or you could put a splash of apple cider vinegar in there, right? We don't need to make it Diet Coke. You are not required to drink Diet Coke. And I just don't think that doing that on a consistent basis is healthy.
This episode is brought to you by Timeline Nutrition. Listen, my main goals for the remainder of the year revolve around health and vitality. After hearing about Timeline Nutrition from several of my friends in the health industry, I decided to give their flagship product, MitoPure, a try. MitoPure contains urolithin A, which is a powerful postbiotic that can be challenging to get from your diet. As you know, science has been a big focus on the podcast, so I was really impressed that Timeline has done 10 years of research to bring this product to market. I've been taking their berry powder for over a month now, and have already noticed a bit of a difference in the gym. Some of the long-term benefits I'm hoping to achieve from taking it include improved energy, muscle strength, and endurance, which are right in line with my goals. So I highly recommend you check out Timeline Nutrition, and they are now offering 10% off your first order of MitoPure. So just go to timeline.com/Doug to get 10% off your first order of MitoPure. That's TIMELINE.com/Doug. Now back to the show. I think it's obvious that alcohol is also bad for our overall health. Like the Surgeon General just came out, I think it's a few weeks ago, and talked about, him pushing these alcohol companies to put labels that inform people on the risk for I think it was like 7 different types of cancer or something like that. And when it comes to like our overall like gut health, I know alcohol can disrupt that as well. And I think oftentimes people think of the dangers of alcohol of, okay, is it going to impact my liver? Is it going to lead to me getting a DUI? Is it going to lead to me, getting divorced? Or is it going to lead to me ending up in rehab or whatever those like life changing events are? How does alcohol impact the gut microbiome, and what should people really take note of when it comes to this?
There's a study that changed my position on this that I came across in the last couple of years. And it led me to move in my own life from a position of like during the pandemic, enjoying a couple of drinks to unwind in the evening, to now there's not alcohol in my house anymore. So I wouldn't describe myself as a teetotaler. Like if I were out with friends, I would have a drink or two. But clearly when people excessively consume alcohol, it is not a surprise that it absolutely decimates the gut microbiome, right? People that are heavily consuming alcohol, and the consequence that comes from this can have different effects in different organs, including like alcoholic liver disease. So if you were to look at people who have alcoholic liver disease and you look under the hood, you would see there's clearly a damaged gut. It's required in order to get there. But what about this idea that a drink or two is good for us? What about that? There's been new research that's come out, Doug, that brings this into question. This was what we would describe an epi effect, where basically it was a healthier population that they were studying that was having a glass of wine every night, right? So, and it's hard to account for all of the characteristics within that population. But the study that changed my mind when it comes to this particular topic is where they took a small group of people and they gave them enough alcohol such that if they got pulled over, they would get a DUI. So they got up to 0.08, all right, which is the legal limit for most states. And they monitored their blood alcohol level and something called lipopolysaccharide from their bloodstream every 30 minutes. Lipopolysaccharide is something that you will find coating, like almost armor for bacteria, coating certain bacteria that live inside of our intestines. These are inflammatory bacteria like E. coli that cause infections. And it's not supposed to be in your bloodstream. It's not. But if the gut barrier gets damaged, then you are opening up a pathway where it can move from your intestines to get access to your blood. And in the process, it will create inflammation. And if it goes too far, it will create an infection. Now, the concern isn't that alcohol is causing infections. But what they found in this study is that you could literally superimpose the two graphs, one for blood alcohol level and the other for lipopolysaccharide level in the bloodstream, you could superimpose them over the top of each other. They were parallel. When blood alcohol went up, so did lipopolysaccharide. When blood alcohol came down, so did polysaccharide. If there was, for whatever reason, a little bump where the blood alcohol was like dipping down and then went back up, guess what? The lipopolysaccharide did. It did the exact same thing. The lipopolysaccharide didn't normalize until the alcohol did. And so effectively what I saw in this is that even from my perspective, even a small amount of alcohol is if it's enough for you to feel it, it's disrupting and damaging your gut barrier. And there's consequences to that. These are the things that we're trying to fix. These are like the things that, like, when wellness experts like myself stand out there and say, do this, 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 and this, we're trying to fix your gut microbiome and your gut barrier. This is like an essential part of health, and alcohol is disrupting that. So from my perspective, I think that, honestly, I said this in Fiber Fueled, I think the safest amount of alcohol is 0. I wasn't doing that in my own life, but I can tell you that now in my own life, like I just don't see any rational basis to include any alcohol anymore.
And why do you think alcohol is so problematic for the gut, even like a little bit? Is it because of the sugar? Is it because of the ethanol? Like, what specifically in alcohol is causing so much damage to the gut microbiome?
If I pull out rubbing alcohol and I use it to clean a person's wounds, why am I doing that? The reason why is because rubbing alcohol destroys bacteria, right? It sterilizes. So, and when you consume alcohol, it's not that necessarily the alcohol that you put in your mouth stays inside your intestines. The point is that your intestines are right next to your bloodstream, and your bloodstream is carrying alcohol. So when there's a detectable blood alcohol level such that you can feel it, then it is going to have this effect.
Why do you think people have such a hard time like changing their lifestyle habits when they hear information like this, despite some of the overwhelming evidence that comes out against certain things?
I think that it's a complex issue. I mean, there were reasons during my life that I consumed alcohol, and I'm sure that you would share in your own life. And so I think it starts with sort of taking a look inside and asking the question, why am I doing this? And what's the answer to that question? But I am also happy to report that alcohol consumption is clearly going down a younger generation of people. The problem, though, Doug, from my perspective with that, is that it seems like they're replacing it with marijuana. And I don't really consider that to be a superior choice either. Like, that to me is rearranging the chairs on the Titanic.
Now, I think I did a series on cannabis where I interviewed Dr. Anna Lemke. I interviewed Dr. John Crystal, who's the chair of psychiatry at Yale, the deputy director of NIDA, and we talked about THC and how the dangers of it, specifically for young adults with developing brains, and how problematic it is. And it's like there's no research at all that proves that any amount of THC is good for your mental health.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're seeing a lot more younger people. And I think there's a difference between, I think the legalization of it has changed perception on young adults. And there's a difference between legalization and decriminalization. I'm all for decriminalizing it and making sure that you're not throwing drug addicts in jail who are busted with weed, right? But
right. Well, there's better ways for us to deal with that.
Exactly. But is there any research out to what like THC does to the gut microbiome?
I don't recall what that research says. To my knowledge, off the top of my head, I don't recall specific gut microbiome data. But what I will tell you is this, that it definitely affects your gut microbiome because it affects your gut motility in a very powerful way. And if you change a person's gut motility, you will always change their microbiome. So as a gastroenterologist, I'm the guy who would have people coming into my office who would basically say, like, I wake up and I throw up all day. And sometimes it would go in cycles, or sometimes it was just continuous. It was every single day. And these people, when you start to dig into it, and many times they were very young, and sometimes their parents were with them, Doug. And I would ask the parents actually to go to the waiting room so I could have a one-on-one conversation. But when you dig into the details here, what you discover is that they felt like the only way to feel better was to smoke more weed or to take a hot shower. And like, this is like a what we would call pathognomonic, which is like, is classic for this condition, where basically they take like super long showers, very, very long, hot, steamy showers, because that actually makes them feel a lot better in terms of their nausea. And what these people have is not being improved by their marijuana. It's caused by the marijuana. So this is called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And the solution to this issue is actually to quit smoking weed. So, but they think that the solution to their problem is to smoke weed. So it's a complex thing, because you also, I think, have drug dependence issues on these people.
Yeah, it's the same thing with like people who say that like weed helps with their anxiety, and what happens is the weed has caused more anxiety, so they think they have to smoke more weed to get rid of the anxiety. It's just like this never ending cycle with it. You know, I think there was a study that was quoted in one of the interviews that they gave healthy individuals, I think I saw that they gave healthy individuals like Delta 9, and people who were otherwise healthy, it like completely jacked up their nervous system, mental health, concentration, and stuff like that.
The neurologic effects are profound. But I'm here to say that it's also gut effects. There's actually striking gut effects, and they're disturbing.
You know, we talk a lot about on the show about mental health, and I know there's a strong connection between the gut and the mind. I know like 90% of our serotonin is produced in the gut, half our dopamine is produced in the gut. So if our gut is not healthy, odds are our mental health may be off as well. In your understanding of the latest research, like what is the actual connection between our mental health and our gut health?
We think of these as being separate organs, the gut and the brain. But in my mind, you can literally put them right next to each other, because they're communicating with each other in such a powerful way that there's no separation between them. It might be signals that travel through the bloodstream or signals that travel through the vagus nerve. So to unpack this, we have two separate nervous systems: our central nervous system, which is our brain and spinal cord, and our enteric nervous system, which is the nerve complex that exists within our gut. Some people call the enteric nervous system the second brain. I would actually argue it's the first brain, because you couldn't develop your brain without that being in place first. And there's 500 million nerves constantly feeling and sensing within your gut, 500 million nerves. And they get centralized into these two nerves called the vagus nerves that carry all of that information from 500 million nerves up to your brain. And so 80% of the vagus nerve is collecting information from your gut, bringing it up to your head. And I think this is where gut feelings come from. But then 20% of the vagus nerves is to bring information back downstairs. So basically they can manipulate each other. So there's different ways in which, whether it be inflammation, these neurotransmitters that you described, so serotonin and dopamine and others, there's over 30 neurotransmitters that exist within our gut. Or it can be the production of chemicals by our gut microbiome, specifically short chain fatty acids, that can travel through the bloodstream and have a powerful effect, not only on the brain and the brain tissue, but also on the blood-brain barrier. Because it turns out that the blood-brain barrier, which is basically a protective wall around the brain to keep bad stuff out, the blood-brain barrier is built with cells that are functionally very similar to the gut barrier. And the proteins that hold those cells together are the exact same proteins. They're called tight junctions. So these short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that are produced within our gut, they repair our gut barrier. They also repair our blood-brain barrier. And this is a powerful and important thing when we're talking about mood disorders, because the new sort of idea on the way in which to conceptualize mood disorders is neuroinflammation. There's evidence that inflammation is the driving factor behind a lot of these conditions, including depression, including anxiety, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. So, and what's happening there? Well, literally there's inflammation in your brain. Short chain fatty acids, which are produced by our gut microbes, is one of the powerful ways that we can actually help to protect the brain by repairing and restoring the blood-brain barrier, but also inside the brain, actually reducing the immune cells and getting them to cool off. So I guess the point being, Doug, that through the vagus nerve, through these neurotransmitters, through precursor molecules that cross the blood-brain barrier, and I would argue quite powerfully through the short-chain fatty acids, our gut has influence over what's happening in our brain that affects our mood, affects our cognition, affects our energy levels, our ability to focus, our ability to memorize things. All of these different factors are ultimately influenced by our gut.
I would love to get your take on supplements for gut health. Over the last, I don't know, 10 plus years, when somebody says they have poor gut health, the answer typically can be just take a probiotic. I would love to hear your opinion on probiotics, and then also what are some of your favorite supplements for people to take on a regular basis to optimize their gut health?
So to fully unpack this topic, let me first define where I see supplements fitting in. I'm of the belief that when it comes to improving a person's health, we should take a look at all of the evidence-based tools that are available to us and put them on the table, right? So diet and lifestyle, that includes sleep and exercise and circadian rhythm and all these different things, and medication and supplements. Put them all on the table. Let the evidence speak for itself in terms of the risks, the benefits, and where we are in terms of the maturity of the evidence, because different things have a different amount. And then using that, make decisions about what is the right way forward for you. Right. So I kind of feel like, Doug, that there's these schools of thought that exist. The reason why I'm presenting it this way is because I feel like there's these schools of thought that are like all one, but none of the others. All like you can only be healthy by eating certain food, but you're not allowed to do supplements or medication. Or our current healthcare system is like basically that, hey, we're going to prescribe you medication and we're skeptical of supplements and we don't think they can help at all. All right. Well, I think that's BS too. So let's find the proper balance that exists and use these tools to our advantage. So it should start with diet and lifestyle. It should always start with diet and lifestyle because those are the things that make us healthier and can help to prevent disease. And then we layer in what we need in order to get the job done and improve our health. I have successfully used supplements in my clinic for, I don't even know how long, but like I really picked up the pace around 2014. So it's been more than 10 years. And part of the reason for this is that within the gut health space, it's like very, if I were a neurologist, I don't know that it would make as much sense to use supplements. But in the gut health space, using prebiotics and probiotics makes a ton of sense. And what I found in general is that I believe that prebiotics are better than probiotics. Okay. And the reason why, first of all, one of the major roles of supplements, like the way I would define supplements is number one, you should make sure that you're getting the things that you need. Right? So if you are deficient, supplements are a way to address that. And number two, supplements help you to optimize. It's not just about getting you up to the minimum. It's about getting you to the sweet spot of like, what is the right amount? So I found that most people are deficient in fiber. So if I add a fiber supplement, this is an easy approach that can help people to accomplish their goals, feel better. When it comes to probiotics, the issue is I think that the marketing has presented them the wrong way to us. So it's not that they're worthless. It's that there's not this one probiotic that fixes every single issue under the sun, including doing your laundry for you and folding it. Like that doesn't exist. But there are clinical trials, randomized controlled trials involving humans where there's a placebo control where they show that a specific probiotic in a specific amount works for a specific health goal. That's the role. So we have to become more precise when it comes to probiotics to know, okay, for this issue, this is what I'm going to use. And then at the end of the day, we need to find what works best for us. So on some level, any of these things that we do, you have to try it, see what happens, and then go from there. Through the years, I was using different supplements in my clinic. And the problem that I always came back to is, I always felt like they could be so much better. Like a fiber supplement, that, not to name any names, but like that was developed when I was a kid in the 80s. And it's like a single type of fiber. It's never changed. We know so much now. Why aren't we tapping into the new science? Why are we not taking advantage of what we know about gut health? And the other issue is purity and transparency. Like you can't find any information about the products that are out there. So I reached a certain point, Doug, where I was like, I feel like people deserve better. I feel like there's an opportunity to create better. And also to create transparency. So I started working in 2021 on creating my own supplement brand. And I actually just launched it a year ago. So almost a year to the day, but not exactly. The company is called 38 Terra. If people are on YouTube, they can see it right here. The packaging is behind my head. So 38 Terra is another way of saying 38 trillion. Terra means trillion, and it's referring to the 38 trillion bacteria that we have living inside of us. And I'll just say that this has been like the most satisfying thing that I've done in my career, because it's an opportunity not just to talk and educate and empower, but to actually create the product that is superior to the available options out there, and that can be difference making for people that have health issues. And so it's been really cool to do that.
That's awesome, man. That's so cool that you've been able to do that. I mean, yeah, it's like the supplement industry is so corrupt, right? And there's no, like you said, there's no information on what's actually in there. And I can imagine in your role as a GI doctor, it's frustrating because you're trying to recommend supplements to help people and probiotics and stuff. Then you find out like what's actually on the bottle isn't what's in there.
Yeah, and I think that corruption, it gets back to some of these issues that exist that we talked about at the very beginning, which is like where people will make things sound like they're very black and white. Like, oh, many people will say probiotics are good, or they'll say probiotics are bad. Well, what if the answer is actually that you need the right probiotic in the right amount for the right condition, right? It's a little bit of a more nuanced way to present that information. So, and I think the same is true with the supplement industry, which is to say that it's categorically bad. People are going to buy supplements. Let's present them with better options. That's the way that I feel about it.
When it comes to probiotics, prebiotics, supplements in general for the gut, I know you have 38 Terra, which you formulated with Simon, who's also a favorite of the podcast and a close friend of mine as well. What's different about 38 Terra, and what should people be on the lookout for when it comes to like buying supplements for their gut?
So 38 Terra is our brand, and we have certain brand values. I think it starts with that. Like, what are your brand values? And we really believe in creating the absolute best formulas using premium ingredients, and then third-party testing the heck out of it and delivering those third-party tests results to people, so that when you purchase a product, you can literally enter on our website, hey, this is the lot number of my product, and you're going to receive the test results for that specific product. So I think it starts on that foundation, Doug. And the reason why I start there is because 38 Terra as a company, we have new products that are in the pipeline that will be coming in 2025 to address specific digestive health problems. But our current product is called Daily Microbiome Nutrition. And this is basically the prebiotic that I always wished that I could have had as a gastroenterologist. So let me talk through the formula real quick and then explain the rationale behind it so that people can hear from me the things that I was thinking about as I was creating this formula. So the formula contains 7 different plant-based ingredients, and that encompasses fiber, resistant starch, and polyphenols. The reason why it has all 3 of those is because those are the 3 main things that are prebiotic. Prebiotic means feeding and fueling the microbiome. So it checks all 3 of those boxes, and it does that through 7 plant-based ingredients that include kiwi fruit and resistant starch from potatoes, and lingonberries that are actually harvested from a forest up in Finland, mango and acacia fiber, and ancestral fruit from Africa called baobab. In total, beets, 7 different plant-based ingredients. The key, as I was going through and selecting each one, is what is the level of evidence? So several of the ingredients have human clinical trials to demonstrate what they do, affecting the gut microbiome, helping to facilitate better bowel movements, addressing issues such as bloating, constipation, and diarrhea. So we have multiple different ingredients that help to facilitate this proven. They also are all low FODMAP. So that's a unique thing, because most forms of fiber that you will find in your store, they're actually going to make you feel worse. They're going to give you more gas and bloating. This was strategically designed from the beginning to make sure that it would be low FODMAP, and it's certified low FODMAP. 7 different ingredients is important because I talk a lot about you mentioned earlier, 30 different plants. The key to gut health is variety. So when we do a single form of fiber and we just pound all that single form of fiber all day, you're feeding only certain bacteria and you're overfeeding them. What about everything else? So adding that variety is really quite essential to making sure that we can accomplish better overall gut health. And then like in terms of testing, we test for over 100 different, I think it's like 120 or maybe even 125 different substances. That includes over 50 different types of pesticides. It has been negative every single time. It's certified glyphosate free. I test for weird things that I have to get laboratories to figure out how to actually do it. So, and I'm proud of this because although we spend a ton of money on these tests, I'm proud of the fact that a person can buy a product, enter in the lot number, and get the test results specific to all of these over 100 different things.
Wow. There's no red food dye number 3 in it.
No, there's no artificial, there's that's like a 38 Terra thing, which is that like we have this laundry list of things that we're just never going to do.
Yeah.
Right. So artificial food colorings, we're just never going to do.
I think that, one of the questions that came through when I told people I was interviewing you is that I think first there can be, like we've kind of talked about this, there can be a lot of confusion on the internet as it pertains to gut health, and the everyday person can get confused. If somebody were to see you at a local coffee shop where you live and they knew who you were, they knew what you did, and they said, "Hey, Dr. B, I don't need a prescription. I don't need necessarily medical advice, but if it were you and you were looking for some daily or weekly things, boxes to check to make sure I'm doing what I can to have a healthy gut microbiome, what would those things be?"
Part of the issue here, Doug, is that we're unique individuals. There is no one size fits all. Our gut microbiome defines that for us. The other issue is sometimes people have underlying health problems that need to be addressed. Right. So that's part of the roadmap that has to be built in. I would separate that there are the things that you can do that have nothing to do with food, and that's a beautiful thing. And there are the things that involve food that may require you to make adjustments and changes. So starting first with the things that you can do that have nothing to do with food, I think that getting consistent sleep. So sleep consistency, establishing like this is the bedtime, make it something reasonable, 10:30, and do plus or minus 30 minutes and always land it. Consistent bedtime, getting, they say 7 to 8 hours. Keep in mind that out of like the time that you're in bed, you're going to be awake for probably 45 minutes. So 7 hours on the dot is not enough. That gives you 6 hours and 15 minutes. You actually need to add an extra 45. Try to get 7 to 8 hours of actual sleep time per night. Get that morning sunlight, right? This is a way to establish that circadian rhythm. Get that morning sunlight. Start your day. I'm a believer in circadian supplementation, Doug. So people talk about supplements all the time. I'm saying to you, it's not just the supplements, it's the timing. Use those supplements to establish morning and evening and slot the right ones into those spots. So for me, like if it's a prebiotic, I think it's optimal to be taken in the morning. But on the flip side, I actually think that there's tremendous power to the consistent use of melatonin in the evening. So, and again, having that time where you say, okay, like roughly 60 to 90 minutes before you go to bed, boom, melatonin every time. Like set the alarm on your clock, boom, right there. All right, clearly to me, exercise, I really believe that we should try to get 30 minutes of light exercise in the morning. Okay, just to start our day. It doesn't count as your workout. So like I love the idea of a ruck outdoors to start my day. Get that natural sunlight, simultaneously work my body, and it turns it all on and I feel fantastic, and then I sleep like a baby that night. But in addition to that, I think a combination of both cardiovascular exercise and strength-based training. I think we need both. Beyond those things, time-restricted eating is something that we can do. I think that 14 hours is a great place to start. 14 hours of fasting, trying to be consistent with that. And then let me put this out there, that our physical health is informed by our emotional and our spiritual health. That the things that occur in our life that aren't like us just like doing the wellness checklist, right? Like we overlook this. And I think you're seeing it in our society right now. So let me just go down the line. 3 quick things here that I want to point out. Number 1, trauma can be the thing that's holding you back. Trauma is not everything is trauma. Hard stuff is not automatically trauma. When we present it like that, that's insulting to people who have dealt with real trauma. Real trauma, though, is something that overwhelms your ability to cope and has lasting psychological effects. And that needs to be addressed, because if it's not being addressed properly, then it's continuing to activate your sympathetic nervous system, which is damaging your gut, activating inflammation, and going to create health issues. All right. So trauma is one of the paths, like addressing trauma head on is one of the paths to healing. Number two, I think that emotional connection is incredibly powerful. We see this throughout the world. People talk about, for example, the blue zones and they focus on the food, but they ignore the human connection that these people have, where they're like in their 90s and going out and hanging out with their friends and being social. They have a purpose, right? They're connected to others, right? We come from tribes. And when we existed in a tribe, it was literally a fight for survival. And your survival was directly connected to your tribe and your connections to other people. And you can't shake that out of us. We can reprioritize towards money or towards material goods. And we can't change the fact that at the end of the day, at the heart of it, human connection is what we all need and satisfies us. We need that. So lean into human connection. And then the third thing, I don't think there's enough conversation about spiritual health. We want to act like it doesn't exist. And then every single person ends up worshiping something. They're worshiping something. Maybe it's money or career or success or politics. And they're losing sight that we were placed on this earth with a purpose. And we all have this natural desire to answer the question, like, what is our purpose? And many people, I would describe it as like and by the way, this was me for most of my life, their heart is closed. And I want to help them to open up their heart, because when they do, then I think that this is something that's going to really help them. I believe like acknowledging the existence of a higher power and nurturing that, I think is actually quite important for us. You can't replace that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're totally right. People, they get so like kind of weird when you talk about spirituality. Like either people think that they're just out worshiping the trees, or they are like obsessive with the universe, or somebody says they're a Christian and people get weird because like, oh, what does that mean? Does that mean that you're going to judge me, or you believe in a God that may or not exist? Like it's a really weird conversation to have. And I think that's why, early in my career, one of the biggest and I guess best pieces of business advice, because it's such a divisive topic, is to never talk religion or politics with your clients, because of the divisiveness that it brings. It's a weird thing, right? That people, I think, are just not able to have nuanced conversations about these two things.
And I absolutely could push my personal beliefs, but that's not what I'm doing. And I think that like what I'm asking people to do is actually quite personal. It has nothing to do with how you interact with other people. It has to do with what you are thinking about and where your head is at, where your heart is at when you're all alone. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I think that you just hit the nail on the head. I think what turns people off about spirituality is being like, I believe this, so let me like vomit it on you, so hopefully you catch what I have, right? And that's just not how the world works.
Well, it's the same thing that turns people off about nutrition and politics too, right?
Yeah, it's like everything. But I do think it's important to explore like your unique purpose in the world, like what you want to bring. And it doesn't mean that you have to like have this God complex and feel like you want to change the world. It just means, well, what are you here to do? Like what drives you? What brings you happiness and fulfillment? And I think that once people can get closer to answering that question, honestly, I think that they'll be able to live a much happier life. And to your point about relationships, it's like, I've talked about this a number of times on the show, that the number one predictor of happiness is how the quality of your romantic relationships, and beneath that, it's like the depth of your friendships, right? Determine your long-term happiness. And so I just think it's something that people need to personally start to explore, because if you just keep having these superficial friendships with people that don't bring value into your life, I think, long term, it may be a problem for you.
Yes. And when you say superficial relationships, that can mean different things, but I would push to also include that, like that can be social media. And you turn to social media hoping to be validated by these people, and their commitment to you is no different than how quickly they can scroll to the next thing. Right. Whereas like, I think that like it goes back to our origins of who we are as humans, that we came from a tribe, that we relied on one another, and that if there was war, those real relationships were the ones that mattered. You actually stepped up to defend one another. Right. And we are fortunate if we can have just a couple of those in our life, because that's what we really need. Not necessarily to go to war, but just people that we can trust and rely on when we need them. and we offer the same.
I interviewed this guy, Sahil Bloom. I don't know if you follow him on social media. He's a good follow, but he talks about your darkest hour friends. And he's like, who are those people that if you went to zero, had no money, nobody around you, who would you call? Who could you call to like take you in? Or if you're broken down at 3 a.m., car's not working, who could you call? Or if you're going through the worst season of your life, like who's going to really be there for you? And he says that, and I totally agree with this, just not just based on my experience, but just from talking to a lot of different people, is that most people aren't really your friends. They're just along for the ride while it's convenient for them. And then eventually you come to this point where either you go through something challenging, you evolve as a person, you decide, I'm not going to party anymore. And then you find out like who your real friends are. You know what I mean? And I just think that's a rude awakening, but it's a necessary awakening for personal growth, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that's the way that it has always worked, and that hasn't changed. And I think that what's changed is that we're spending an average of 6 to 7 hours per day on social media instead of sitting eye to eye across from one another and talk. So Doug, I apologize because you asked me ways to improve the gut, and I ended up talking about all these things that have nothing to do with nutrition. So I guess just to summarize my first book, Fiber Fueled, and the general concepts of nutrition, I'm of the belief that no matter what dietary pattern you follow, because I don't really care what it is, I'm not really big on those names either. Anyway, no matter what dietary pattern you follow, I think that it makes complete and total sense to add more variety of different plants to your diet. And so if there's only one thing from a nutritional perspective that people take away is to add more different types of plants to their diet, then I have accomplished my goal in being here today.
Well, Dr. B, I want to say, I think what you talked about, the non-health and wellness stuff, like the non-diet nutrition tips, I think are just as important, if not more important, because you can eat all the plants you want all day, but if you're doing it by yourself, what's the point, right? Well, dude, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. I love our conversations. You're a good dude. You're a great friend. You put a lot of good content out there. I just think you're somebody that people should definitely follow, buy all his books, absorb the content, because you put out great stuff.
Dude, thank you so much, Doug. It's a great pleasure. And I guess let me just throw out that there's a free resource that's available to anyone who's interested. I work really hard to try to provide as many resources for free as I can. And, of course, there's social media, but really I would love for people to come to my website and sign up for the email list. And you would be joining a community of 200,000 people where we're working together to improve the health of our guts. And the cool thing about it is that I'm not restricted there. So I control everything about that. So I don't have to worry about like algorithms and things like this. I just put out what I think really matters and helps people. So it's fun.
Amazing. Well, Dr. B, thank you once again for coming on and for all of your wisdom.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.